dancing across the water with his galleons and guns, looking for the new world and that palace in the sun. He came dancing across the water. Cortez, Cortez, what a killer.
Welcome back. In this video, we will be discussing Europe's maritime empires in the Americas from 1492 to 1750. So the big question you should be able to answer after watching this video is, how were the Europeans able to quickly conquer and decimate the indigenous peoples of the Americas? In the last video, we discussed European exploration of the Americas. In this video, we'll be discussing both colonization and ultimately maritime empire building. So you see here the first empires built in the Americas by Europeans. In green here we have the Spanish. In this peach color we have the Portuguese. In the blue here we have the French, Louisiana. And then in the red here we have the British and the 13 colonies, and also up here in Canada. So during the first global age from 1450 to 1750, the Spanish, the Portuguese, the Dutch, the French, and the British all built maritime empires by colonizing in the Americas. So a couple things to recognize there. First, this is the first time we're really discussing maritime empires. Previous to this, we'd been discussing other land-based empires, right? Empires that had expanded over land. Now, for the first time in period 4, we're discussing maritime empires, empires that require colonization across oceans. So I want to make sure we understand this word, colonies, as well. So a colony is a territory that's controlled by a distant, oftentimes mother country, or a distant powerful state, and that sends people over to that particular territory in order to occupy it and control it, and ultimately to transmit its culture, whether it be through language or religion, on to the peoples of that territory. The Spanish were the first to establish a permanent colony in the Americas, a colony that will become known as New Spain. And so this really begins with Spanish occupation of the Caribbean, starting with the voyages of Christopher Columbus in 1492. And the native peoples of this region, the Carib Native Americans, were just wiped out by European diseases, mainly because this particular region is hotter and wetter, and therefore diseases spread more rapidly across the Caribbean. The Spanish then went to Mesoamerica and conquered the Aztecs, and then down here to South America, conquering the Incan people of the Andean region. Now, so the Spanish went to the population centers, really, of the Americas, right? Mesoamerica, the Andes Mountains here. The Spanish, their major rival were the Portuguese, and they both, as a result of exploration, were able to assert claims to the New World. Both of them got into a dispute over how to divide up that territory. And so they called upon the person who ultimately was more powerful than either the King of Spain or the King of Portugal, and that was the Pope. So Pope Alexander VI helped settle this dispute between the Portuguese and the Spanish by helping to get them to enter into a treaty called the Treaty of Tordesillas, which divided up the New World between the Spanish and the Portuguese. So here we can see a map, and here is the line of longitude that the Pope drew in order to divide up these claims. And so clearly they didn't have a very good understanding of the real extent of territory that existed in the New World at the time that this treaty was written. Now, ultimately, this line was eventually moved once it became more clear, and the treaty was really designed to allow the Spanish and the Portuguese to conquer any territory where the people were non-Christians. And so it's a little deceptive here, but there's actually another line of longitude that's drawn on the other side of the map in the Pacific Ocean. And so the Portuguese probably got more than you realize out of this treaty. Not only were they able to colonize Brazil, but they also then got kind of exclusive control over any territory within Asia and Africa that was non-Christian. And so again, the Portuguese were building that trade post empire throughout the Indian Ocean sea lanes. And the ultimate effect of this is that today Portuguese is the most widely spoken language in Brazil, whereas Spanish is the predominant language in the rest of Latin America. Spanish are going to conquer places where there's a significant concentration of people, both in Mesoamerica with the Aztec Empire and in South America with the Incans. And so they're going to send conquistadors in order to conquer the Aztecs and the Incan Empire. So that word conquistador, as its root, has the word conquer in it. And so these conquistadors, their goal was to fulfill the 3 G's. That was what they were motivated by. Glory, both for Spain and for themselves, and as we'll find out, they were able to enrich themselves through their conquest. The Spanish crown gave the conquistadors, as we'll find out later, the right to take anyone who they conquered and put them into a forced, coerced labor system. They were also motivated by God. Christianity is a missionary religion, and so there was this effort by conquistadors to convert what was perceived by many Christians as heathenistic religious practices among native peoples, worshiping, spirits in nature, animistic style worship with human sacrifice, and also a quest for gold. Now, there wasn't a lot of gold that would be found. We'll find out later that there was another mineral that was widely found in parts of New Spain. So from 1519 to 1521, Hernan Cortez, the conquistador, is going to very quickly conquer the Aztecs. Now, the Aztec Empire is this vast empire with the city Tenochtitlan located on the island in the middle of Lake Texcoco, surrounded by all these chinampas. When the Spanish got there, they were just amazed by the Aztec city and said that it compared favorably to a number of cities in Spain. And so the Spanish were able to do this with just, a couple hundred conquistadors conquering this vast empire with, hundreds of thousands of soldiers. Now, how were they able to do this? One of the secret weapons that the Spanish had was this particular figure right here. This is La Malinche is her native name, or Dona Maria. She served as a translator for Cortez here in his dealings with various native peoples. And you can see here in this image, Cortez is being given tribute. That's what's located down here by these native peoples. This is after the conquest of the Aztecs. And so this woman, La Malinche, has a very controversial kind of legacy because she provided assistance to the Spanish, and some people argue ultimately betrayed her people, although her people had also sold her into slavery. So it's a very complex story and very fascinating story of this woman, La Malinche. So Francisco Pizarro was another conquistador who was going to conquer the Incan Empire from 1531 to 1532. Now, Pizarro is going to follow the playbook of Cortez, and he's going to capture the Incan ruler Atahualpa here, and that's going to send the Incan Empire to a period of chaos. There was also a prior period of chaos before the arrival of the Spanish because European diseases preceded the arrival of the actual Spanish, and so the Incan ruler prior to Atahualpa had died as a result of these diseases, and so there was a conflict within the Incan Empire over who was going to be the next ruler prior to the arrival of the Spanish. So, how did these large and powerful empires fall so quickly to a small group of Spanish conquistadors? Well, the short answer to that question is the title of the Jared Diamond book, Guns, Germs, and Steel. So, the Spanish possessed steel and gunpowder weapons. Now, the reason they possess steel, if you'll think back to period 1 in world history, steel was actually first developed not by the Europeans, but instead by groups of nomadic peoples. Eventually, it got spread by the Hittites. And so this was not, again, a technology that the Europeans developed themselves, but instead Europeans ultimately would later benefit from. Gunpowder weapons, another example of that. Gunpowder first invented by the Chinese is going to be spread along the Silk Road by the Mongols. And so ultimately these two technologies will make it to Europe. The Europeans are also going to introduce diseases such as smallpox to the natives, and this is going to wipe out native populations, as we described before in the Great Dying. 75% to 90% are the estimates of native people who died as a result of exposure to these diseases. And the reason that they were able to contract these diseases in the first place was because of their proximity to domesticated animals. So many of these diseases, like smallpox, influenza, measles, originate in domesticated animals. And then the intensity of trade across Eurasia is going to lead to the rapid spread of diseases across Eurasia as compared to the Americas. And then finally, and a factor that oftentimes I think doesn't get enough credit, is the way in which the Spanish are going to exploit rivalries among neighboring tribes. So you can see in this image here, Cortez riding on his horse. They're fighting against the Aztecs here. You can see some, heads and arms strewn about. And then ultimately, there's these people that I want you to notice. So this is another tribe of Mesoamerica that didn't like the Aztecs, and so were more than willing, when the Spanish showed up, to enter into alliances with them in order to defeat the Aztecs, because as you recall, the Aztec Empire was an empire that was built upon the tribute system. And so many of the neighboring tribes that had been conquered by the Aztecs were having to provide people in the form of human sacrifice victims. And so this is going to not engender the Aztecs to many of the neighboring people. And so they'll be, again, all too willing to join the Spanish when the Spanish show up in the early 1500s. So as a result of watching this video, you should be able to answer this big question. How were the Europeans able to quickly conquer and decimate the indigenous peoples of the Americas? Thanks for watching.